Welcome, everyone. My name is Lola Ivy. I am the Professional and Career Development Coordinator for UCLA's Campus Human Resources. Today, we will discuss the art of crafting a compelling presentation. Mainly, we'll focus on some minor changes you can make to elevate any presentation you create. During this workshop, you will use a 4-step system to develop a compelling presentation. Step 1 is scripting your presentation. Step 2 is crafting stunning visuals that support rather than detract from your message. Step 3 is employing strategic rehearsal techniques to ensure you're as prepared as possible. And step 4 involves cycling through adjustments, rehearsals, and repetitions as needed to build confidence in your delivery. We'll begin right at the top with step 1, scripting your presentation. There are many elements of a great presentation, but today we are going to focus on just 3. A great presentation speaks directly to the audience in front of you, has a clear purpose, and features engaging content. Let's explore the importance of speaking directly to your audience. I find that keeping the audience in mind is the best way to start drafting content for any presentation. You might wonder why we should focus on the audience first. Let's look at an example that shows how considering the audience early on can make your presentation better. Let's say you're currently presenting research on PTSD experiences among veterans in the United States. Clarifying who will be in the audience and tailoring your presentation to appeal directly to them will give you an advantage and make your talk more engaging. So let's explore how the talking points might change depending on your audience. If you're presenting your research to peer UCLA graduate students, you might emphasize your research methodologies, for example, since that could build a stronger connection with your fellow graduate students. The same applies if you're presenting to other leading researchers in your field. However, if the presentation is in front of, let's say, politicians, you might shift your approach by linking your research to current or upcoming legislative reforms or how certain legislative tactics have affected the PTSD rates among US veterans. And even more so, if your audience consists of actual veterans, you could craft a better presentation by appealing to them directly on a human level, because these are the people that are directly impacted by your research. In summary, you should not spend too much time creating presentations based solely on what you personally think is important. Instead, you want to put yourself in your audience's shoes and consider what they care about. Let's review some prep questions to help us better understand our audience and use that understanding to craft a presentation tailored specifically to them. When conducting an audience assessment, the first and most obvious question is, ta-da, who is in the audience? And will the audience be made up of a monolith of people or a very diverse group? Next, consider what the audience already knows about your topic. To create an engaging presentation, aim to remove any unnecessary information that might be considered boring to your audience. By gauging your audience's prior knowledge about your topic, you can avoid repeating what they already know and instead focus on the core parts of your presentation. Things that they want to learn more about, or things that you want them to see your perspective on. Similarly, think about what the audience genuinely cares about regarding your topic. For example, if you're presenting to peers, esteemed faculty, or individuals with lived experiences, you're going to approach your presentation differently in order to excite them and engage them. When crafting your script, you also want to manage any conflicting wishes, needs, or ideologies within your audience. And finally, consider what actions, attitudes, or beliefs you want your audience to take away from your speech. You should be able to answer this question. At the end of my presentation, the audience will blank, and fill in that blank. Do you want the audience to support more research like yours? Do you want the audience to change their opinions about your topic? Or do you want the audience to become advocates for what you're talking about? Clarify the key takeaway you hope that your audience will have from the presentation and make sure that your presentation script delivers on that takeaway. Another important part of a great presentation is to have a clear purpose. This means you need to identify a main goal for your presentation. There are three main goals why someone may be asked to give a presentation. To uncover the main purpose of your presentation, I want you to ask yourself this question. Are you presenting to persuade, to inform, or to inspire? If you are presenting to persuade, you are trying to convince people to do something or think a certain way after your presentation. If instead the main purpose of your presentation is to inform, then it means you have a more information-focused presentation that gives people the key details they need to know in order to be knowledgeable about your topic as well. And lastly, if it's to inspire, it means that your main purpose is to galvanize people and create feelings of hope and change. If you don't have a clear understanding of your presentation's purpose and accidentally try to do two or all three of these things, it could lead to a situation where your audience is confused or unsure of what they're supposed to do with the content you just shared. To keep your audience engaged, you want to make sure they understand why they are sitting in the room. Again, what is the main takeaway of your presentation? And the final element of a great presentation I want to highlight is that a great presentation is going to contain engaging content. There are many ways to engage your audience during a presentation, but I want to highlight three today. The first is to simplify complex information using analogies. We never want to push away our audience with excessive jargon or confusing language. So if you're presenting on a complex subject, make sure to use analogies to help paint a clear picture and allow your audience to visualize the information differently in an easier to understand way. You can also deepen the connection by adding personal anecdotes, especially if you personally have a heartfelt connection to the subject. And the cherry on top, try creating a strong mental image through a powerful example. Learning something new can be difficult, but examples help connect with your audience on a more human level. To demonstrate how to use this energetic tactic, I'll share an example from my own experience. During my graduate degree program, I completed my final capstone project on the topic of intergroup conflict. Let me explain intergroup conflict using the power of example. Intergroup conflict is fighting, disagreement, or apathy felt between two smaller groups within a singular larger group. Here's an example of intergroup conflict most adults are aware of. The US Senate is one large group of people working together to draft legislation for the United States government. However, although the Senate is one group, it is divided into two inner groups, the Democrats and the Republicans. When these two political parties often fight publicly in the news, it is considered intergroup conflict. Similar forms of intergroup conflict occur in the workplace, such as a traditional business like Barnes& Noble, where conflicts might happen between employees. For example, one group of booksellers might have conflict with the baristas working in the cafe, the same way that Republicans and Democrats might fight on the Senate floor. See, notice how I used a business term, intergroup conflict, but I first illustrated the concept by using a familiar example, the US Senate. That is the power of example. To conclude step one of scripting your presentation, I want to share some tips on what you should and shouldn't do when drafting any kind of presentation. Let's start with the things that we're going to avoid. We are going to avoid using acronyms, slang, or inside jargon, especially if you're unsure what the audience knows about your topic. Using acronyms and insider language can alienate your audience, and we never want them to feel inferior or like they don't understand what you're talking about. Speaking of the audience, it's also important to use inclusive language whenever possible. And remember, bigger words are not always better. Sometimes we want to impress our audience by showing them we're eloquent, but if we use words that the audience might not understand, that's another way to alienate them. Additionally, if you speak during your presentation in a way that's very different from how you normally talk, it could increase your nervousness. Therefore, I want you to replace difficult to pronounce words that you're unsure about or that the audience might not understand, and instead swap it out with the simpler synonym. All right, how about the do's? A big yes is using analogies, metaphors, similes, and examples to connect your content more visually to your audience. After all, a good presentation is also a story. Next, feel free to repeat important words or elements to drive home emphasis on key takeaways. I'll say it again. It's okay to repeat key elements. See what I did there? Repetition, when done right, can be a great signifier to your audience to pay extra special attention to a certain idea or group of words. In the same vein, use vocal differentiation to place an emphasis on important words. Now that we reviewed all of the tips and tricks to help you with step one, which is scripting your presentation, we can move on to step two, crafting compelling visuals. After all, our slide decks are our sidekick companions to what we share verbally during our presentation. Here is an example of a slide that is horrifically designed and structured. Let's look a little closer at why this is a bad slide. The most obvious reason is that there is very little contrast and the text is too small to read. There's also too much text overall, even with the use of bullet points to break up the content. Too many words in a slide does not support your presentation well because humans have difficulty reading and listening at the same time. If people are reading your slides, they aren't listening to you, and we want them to listen to you. It's important to remember that your slides are a side dish that you pair with your main dish, which is your verbal presentation. Your slides aren't the star. What you say verbally is the star. Your slides should serve as a companion rather than your entire script. In summary, your slide deck shouldn't be a catch-all for information you can't cover verbally. It's meant to be a visual aid only. So let's take a look at another example. At first glance, you might see the slide as quite impressive because it uses many visual and graphic elements with colorful photos sprinkled throughout. However, there is a lot going on here that hinders more than helps. Let's start with the positives. We have pictures that help humanize the slide and keep the audience engaged. They also provide a visual aid that makes it easier for the audience to follow along. Additionally, the slide employs a 3-section or 3-column layout, which is effective most of the time because 3 columns are usually the maximum before a slide begins to look too cluttered. Now, let's look at the negatives. The slide is very loud. There's a lot of color and imagery everywhere, which can be overwhelming. We also see a lot of full sentences on the slides. Remember, if people are reading, they're not listening. Therefore, all of this text can cause some discomfort for your audience because they may not know where to focus first. The audience might even stop paying attention entirely because they're confused about where to look or what to focus on. Finally, some of the graphics and text don't add any useful information at all. For example, all 3 of these people have 5 stars. They're all gardeners. Why do we need to explicitly list this information for each and every person when it doesn't add value? It just takes up time and makes the slide more cluttered. If I were to redo the previous slide, here's an example of how I might do it to keep all of the good elements while removing a lot of the bad ones we just discussed. We still have images and a great use of color that pops, and those visual elements will keep the audience engaged. However, we removed all of the redundancies. Instead of saying, meet our expert team, we change it to meet our team of gardeners. That way we're not repeating gardeners 3 times. We eliminated the stars because they don't have meaning. We also shortened all of the sentences from the previous slide into just 1 sentence. Now, you could even remove that sentence because, again, the main focus is on what you're saying. The goal isn't slides with overly complicated graphics and animation. The goal is to have slides that are compelling. Ultimately, we want to design our slides with a focus on both function and form, aiming for a healthy balance between the two. Function refers to your presentation's usability, while it also is going to support you verbally. Form relates to aesthetics, how your presentation looks, and whether it is visually appealing. All right, let's explore how to find this balance. When it comes to function, there are a few important things to be mindful of. The first is legibility. Can the audience clearly read what's on your slide? When we examine legibility, two key factors are the size and the font of your text on the screen. It might be tempting to use a more decorative font or a smaller one to fit more content onto your slide, but your audience can't read it, so it might as well not be there. Next, consider creating slides that lean towards simplicity rather than overcomplication. This means limiting the number of words and using more images and visuals to represent data whenever possible. Remember, people go to presentations to listen more than read your slides. Slides are just there to support your verbal delivery. Lastly, regarding function, make sure to choose colors with good contrast because the last thing you want is a dark background with a dark font or a light background with a light font. This also aligns with our concerns about legibility. We want visuals to be appealing and accessible through proper contrast. Moving on to balancing form, be mindful of the color scheme and the layout of your presentation. Layouts refer to how you structure your content. Avoid layouts where information is scattered randomly. For example, if you had some content on the right, on the bottom, on the top, in the middle, that might be visually overstimulating for your audience. Since most people read from left to right, it's important to structure your slides accordingly so that viewers know where to focus and in what order to look at things. Now, more specifically about color, note that even though most of us just pick a slide template randomly, color is not benign. If I showed you this bright red color, what does it make you feel? What does it remind you of? A bright red might remind you of a stop sign, a red light, or an emergency. We often associate red with alerts, importance, or something bold. It can also sometimes cause anxiety. So, depending on how you use it, you might not want to have anxiety going through your audience. On the other hand, if you switch to this brighter blue, it might make you think of the sky or the ocean, something more lighthearted, fun, or playful. The same idea applies when you pair certain colors together. For example, if I combine this deeper blue with yellow, and since we're all Bruins here, you might associate these two colors with UCLA, which is accurate. These are the exact color codes for the UCLA brand. So you should be mindful of branding when creating a presentation as well, especially if you're presenting the brand on a large scale. When creating a presentation, you want to be careful in choosing your color palette. This is an example of the color palette I used for this workshop. I used two primary colors, one secondary, and two neutrals. These two darker blues are my primary colors. I mainly use them for fonts. The lighter blue serves as a secondary color when I want to add a pop of color, but I don't want it to stand out very much. And then I have these two neutral colors, brown and white. When creating a color scheme, it's best to stick within this 5 color range or less. Typically, you want to pick 1 or 2 primary colors, 1 to 2 secondary colors, and 1 to 2 neutral colors. Using more than that might make it look loud and overwhelming. Now that you've written the script for your presentation and you've created the slide deck, it's time to move on to step 3, the rehearsal stage. When rehearsing your presentation, consider experimenting with the 5 Ps of public speaking to discover which vocal techniques you like and can add to your delivery. The first P is pitch. Everyone has a natural pitch range for their voice, but we can adjust our pitch to create vocal variation and match the tone. For example, raising our pitch slightly like this can produce a more upbeat and positive tone, while lowering it slightly like this can help communicate more serious matters more effectively. The next P is pace. Pace refers to the speed of your delivery. Are you speaking more slowly like this? Or are you increasing your speed like this? During practice, explore different pacing to see what feels most natural most of the time. Also, identify parts of your presentation where adjusting the speed can influence the energy and flow. For example, when conveying something very serious or challenging, slowing down emphasizes the gravity of the situation and helps the audience focus, whereas speeding up can make the tone more energetic and lively. The next P is power or volume. You can change your volume during your speech to alter the energy or to command more attention. Our fourth P, and one of my favorites, is pausing. Pausing involves taking intentional, silent breaks to emphasize points. Don't hesitate to use pauses to give your audience a moment to process what you've just said. Even a brief 1 second pause can create a dramatic effect, like that pause right there. The last P, and perhaps the most complex, is persona. Think of persona as your stage alter ego. It is still you, but with certain parts of your personality amplified or highlighted when speaking in front of others. It's about challenging different facets of yourself that may usually stay in the background. Remember to be mindful of all 5 Ps and experiment with them to see what feels and sounds right. In addition to practicing your 5 Ps until you find something that feels impactful and comfortable, there are other tips you can use during rehearsal. The first is to practice in conditions similar to the actual event, if possible. The more similar you are with the environment or structure of your presentation, the better. For example, if you already know what you'll be wearing, try rehearsing in that same outfit to see if your clothing distracts you or supports you. If it's comfortable, then you might be able to do a great job. But if your outfit is too tight, it's making you adjust it, that could be distracting. These are all things that you can figure out during the rehearsal phase. Next, especially if you're under a tight time restriction, you need to time yourself. However, I do want to make an important note. Remember to add some extra time as a cushion. For instance, allow additional time for audience laughter and add some buffer time for potential technical difficulties, like not being able to accurately move forward your slide deck. Once you feel confident with your rehearsal, the next step is to record yourself. Even when practicing alone, we might think that we've caught all of our mistakes or our delivery issues, but we only can see them when watching the recording. You might notice tics or mannerisms you want to reduce or eliminate. So, recording yourself will enhance your rehearsal and boost your confidence. And now we have reached our last step, step 4. Adjust, rehearse again, and repeat. We will continue to make changes, practice, and repeat until we feel confident, comfortable, and prepared for showtime. All right, that was our 4-step process to add structure to creating, rehearsing, and delivering presentations. But before I go, I want to share some last-minute tips on how to handle stage fright. If you get nervous when speaking in front of a group of strangers or even a group of your peers, here are some things you can do to help you get through the experience more smoothly. First, try to have some positive self talk or self encouragement nearby. You can do this by recording a video for yourself or writing a letter to yourself that you can read just before the presentation. This should remind you that you have prepared and practiced and you're ready to go. Next, consider incorporating physical movement or relaxation techniques as part of your pre presentation warm up. For some people, movement is the best option because it helps release jitters and calm the nervous system. For others, doing some short breathing or meditative exercises may help settle a fired up nervous system. And finally, perhaps most importantly, Remember that everyone in the audience is there to support you. No one wants you to fail. They're there to listen and learn from your content. Remind yourself that this is not about you, but about the message you're sharing. Everyone is eager to hear what you have to say and they want you to succeed. Thank you, everyone, for listening to me share a bit of advice on creating impactful presentations. Again, my name is Lola Ivy. It has been an honor to support your public speaking. Best of luck, be it Lux, and go Bruins.